Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my December 2021 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, and have been doing that for 5 years now, but today we're just talking about the books. Normally I wouldn't make a YouTube video in my bathrobe, however our furnace is broken and winter decided to actually grace the West Coast this year, so it's snowing outside and I need to be cozy, so this is happening. I'm going to start with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos like this, so if you need to skip forward or backwards to anything, those links are down below. While you're down there, you might as well subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon to see if that does anything. In November, I read 19 books for a total of 6,032 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 1,953 of those pages were actually about 56 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 13 adult books, 4 YA books, and 2 middle grade books. I read 15 novels, 2 graphic novels, 1 anthology, and 1 novella. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was fantasy and contemporary, followed by historical fiction, sci-fi, romance, and non-fiction. If you adjust by page count, not a lot changes. Many of these books were from the library, but I also read books that were free from an author, NetGalley, Friends, or independent bookstores. I read 5 audiobooks, 5 hardcovers, 4 ebooks, 3 paperbacks, and 2 were on the web. Nearly half of my books were in the 300 to 399 pages range, and nearly everything was published in the last decade or so. The majority of these books were written by female authors, and half of the protagonists were female. In terms of setting, the US continues to dominate, but I had some reads from the UK, Canada, India, Brazil, China, and other worlds. In terms of diversity of subject matter, there's no surprise that many of these books were queer, given that it was the 8th round of the Queer Lit Readathon, but I also had some books regarding race, mental health, and some intersectional reads. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 2.5-star read, 4 3.5-star reads, 8 4-star reads, 2 4.5-star reads, and 4 5-star reads. Let's start with the lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? My 2.5-star read for the month was Cobalt Blue. This is a book that takes place with 2 different perspectives. One is a brother and one is a sister, and it turns out that both of them fell in love with the same guy. In the brother's perspective, he's writing in the second person, so he's writing to the person he fell in love with, and in the sister's perspective, she's writing letters about her experiences. This just didn't really work for me, and then I got very excited that there is an adaptation of it that came out by the same author because he's also a film director. However, even though it's a Netflix movie, it's not available on Netflix in Canada yet, so even though I figured I could probably get more out of the story by watching it as a film, I wasn't able to do that. On to my 3.5-star reads, the first one being This Book Is Gay. This is the first book in my adult life anyway where I sat down and read the book and listened to the audiobook at the same time. I actually used to do this as a kid all the time, you know, those ones that you would get on cassette and then you get the picture book and you read along and you kind of learn how to read. Because yes, I'm old and we used cassettes when I was a child. In any case, the reading experience of this was interesting because I could get through it much more quickly, but also the addition of the audiobook and the physical book that I were reading were not the same, so every once in a while the audiobook would go off on a tangent or change words slightly, so that was a weird reading experience. This is meant to be an instruction manual for people that are coming out or for people that just want to know more about the community, and it does have some gaps in it, but it was originally published, I believe, in 2013 or 2014, so that makes sense. Even in that short amount of time, we've learned more things about the gender and sexuality spectrums that could have been in here if we had known about them at the time. The anthology I read this month was Love After the End, which is edited by Joshua Whitehead. This is a series of indigiqueer and two-spirit authors writing about those experiences in fiction, and I very much enjoyed it. There was a large variety of different authors in this, so it was great to both see people that I've read from before and then people that I hadn't. Like every anthology ever, some was a hit, some was a miss, but overall I enjoyed my experience with this anthology. Next we have Bright Shining World, which was actually the book that I read for my library scavenger hunt, which is when you give me a prompt, I go to the library, find a book that fulfills that prompt, and then do a reading vlog for it. So I will link that down below because that was a fun reading vlog. This was a very weird book. Without getting into the plot, what you're going to get in this book is a very difficult relationship between a father and a son who move around quite a lot for the father's work. You're also going to get circumstances where you you don't know what is real. I also had to giggle the other day because I got a comment on that library scavenger hunt video about how this book does sound really, really weird, and it was from the author himself, so I had to laugh about that. Finally, for this category, we have Soul Circuit. This is the one that I put down as a novella because I picked it up for my novella for the Queer Lit Readathon. However, I don't think it was a novella, but I can't find an accurate page count of it anywhere, and I read it as an ebook, which means I can't get a page count from that. So I counted it as though it is in fact a novella, although I'm pretty sure that if I found a page count, it would be way longer than a novella. This is about a character named Jin who lives in Pasadena and what she likes to call Jin City because there's a whole section of it in Koreatown that she basically owns. She's a big mogul, but she also has this implant in her brain that she didn't ask for that is starting to break down, and that is going to negatively impact her health and she could end up dying soon. So basically she goes on a big adventure to solve this problem, and it was a lot of fun. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being The Broken Girls. This one has a dual timeline between Vermont in the 50s and Vermont now, or at least the now of the present of this book. Essentially, this school is for broken girls, so girls that don't fit into the society of the time in the 1950s. So for example, if somebody was born out of wedlock, or they were just unwanted, or they were an orphan, or anything like that, they could be sent to this school. In the present, there's a journalist that wants to write about this school because her sister was actually found dead there 20 years previously, and she still has some questions about that. So she's trying to work that out, and she also ends up stumbling upon a mystery from the school from the 1950s. I find I really like these dual timelines and getting to learn a mystery well after the fact. There's just something about that that really works for me, so if you can think of any other books that have dual timelines and mysteries, please let me know. The middle grade book that I read for Queer Lit Readathon was The Ship We Built by Lexie Bean. This one is about a character who is in middle school and coming to terms with the fact that their gender is probably not what they were assigned at birth. But because there's something off about this character that they haven't been able to quantify for themselves, they've kind of lost friends. Also, they are dealing with a horrible home life, and they're basically coping with all of this by writing letters to someone and then attaching them to balloons and just letting them fly. There are definite trigger warnings for this one, including sexual assault of a minor. It's not something that you see on page, but it is something that the character often writes about and then kind of has to skirt around because they don't really know how to feel about it. It also has to do with bullying and friendship and attraction, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's tough to read, but it's worth the read if you can get through that subject matter. Next, we have A Touch of Ruckus, which is just a book I absolutely adored. This book is about a main character who, when she touches objects, sometimes she can get a memory from the object, which is really inconvenient because you can't really control it. So sometimes she ends up learning things about people they don't want her to know, and that's ended some friendships in the past. She also kind of keeps her whole family together. She's kind of the glue, and she needs a little bit of a break from that, and she ends up going to stay with her grandmother. While she's there, she meets this new person at the pizza shop who is non-binary and a very cute love interest, and they go on adventures from there having to do with this special power. Both of the books I've read by this author I've absolutely adored. They are wonderful queer middle grade books, so definitely pick them up. Next, I have Huntress from Malinda Lo. This is kind of like a prequel to Ash because it's in the same universe, but it's hundreds and hundreds of years before Ash, so it's not really a prequel, it's just in the same setting. Essentially, there's this prophecy that brings these two girls from this magic school together. They haven't really met each other before, they've kind of seen each other in the halls, that type of thing, but they've never really interacted, and because of this prophecy, they both have to go on this trek to try to find the fairy queen and figure out what they can do to fix certain things that are happening in the kingdom. And along the way, maybe they fall in love. Of course they fall in love. I read it for the Queer Lit Readathon. It was a sapphic book. It was very delightful. I also read These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a reimagining of Romeo and Juliet, but set in the 1920s in Shanghai, and it includes some queer representation, which I was absolutely very excited to see. What I liked about this is it didn't stick directly to exactly what happens in Romeo and Juliet, but it changed the beats just slightly. So for example, when the two characters were both about 15, their relationship was found out and they were kind of separated. Now it's about 5 years later, they're back in the same city and they find themselves having to work together because there's a plague that has come to Shanghai and they both want to solve this issue because it's killing people on both sides of their divide. This is the first in a duology, so I'm very excited to listen to the second book when that hold finally comes in from the library. Next, we have The Kindred by Alechia Dow. I read The Sound of Stars by this author, absolutely loved it. it, and it turns out that this is sort of a prequel, but not really, because it takes place in the same universe, but it's following different characters and it takes place before The Sound of Stars. So it alludes to some of the things that happen in that book, and there's some Easter eggs, which was a lot of fun. This one has to do with a society where when you are born, if you are rich, you are paired up with a poor person, and vice versa, obviously, and you have a telekinetic connection with that person. This is meant to bring some form of equality to the society so that people kind of know where other people are coming from. However, when you're royalty, you're supposed to be paired with somebody a little bit closer to your status, but that didn't happen with Felix. Felix was paired up with Joy. She is kind of bottom of the barrel when it comes to poverty society, and he is a prince. However, their relationship is wonderful. Basically, everybody who has a relationship with their kindred, it turns out being wonderful, because this is the person who knows you the most of anybody in the world. However, because of some political meddling, it looks like this relationship is breaking down, and then some things happen, and it goes from there. It's an action-adventure story at parts. It's very sweet at parts. I just really enjoyed everything from this universe, so I'm excited to see what Alechia writes next. Next we have The Nature of Witches. This is about a school, again, for people who have magic powers, but it's set in kind of this future where the earth has been depleted by people using too much magic to do things for the people that don't have magic, and because of that, the climate has just gone absolutely bonkers, and they're kind of training these people so they can combat these different climate things that are happening. So on the one hand, it's magic school, and on the other hand, it has to do with climate change, which I thought was really, really cool. Our main character is what's called an Everwitch. This is something very, very rare because all of the witches' magic has to generally do with one season. So either you're spring, summer, autumn, or winter. However, an Everwitch is all of those things. And as the seasons change, the attitude of this witch changes as well. So she knows that in summer she has flings. As soon as it turns into fall, she no longer is in love with that person. And that's a circumstance we see right at the beginning of the book. Her magic has actually hurt people in the past, so she doesn't really want to train to use it, because every time she does, she ends up hurting somebody, and she's thinking about getting rid of her magic altogether. I thought this was incredibly inventive, and I very much enjoyed it. Last on my 4-star list is The Flames of Albiyon. This is the first in what is hopefully going to be a series. It does leave off saying that there will eventually be another book. I just don't know when it's coming, but I am very excited to read it in the future. This has to do with the main character who is an orphan, so she was dropped off at the university in her town who takes in all orphans. She's now about 27, she's a scholar, and she's doing some of her cleaning duties one day when this egg that has been at the university for decades upon hundreds of years cracks, and she thinks she's in trouble for breaking it. However, as it turns out, this is not a fossilized egg like everybody thought. There is a live dragon embryo in there, and it is decided that she is its person. How it works with dragons in society is they will not hatch until they find a person that they know is going to be their companion, and that means she's got about a month until she is going to have this dragon she needs to raise. Because this happens so rarely, the university actually contacts somebody else who is a companion to a dragon and that dragon, and they come to visit, and then a little bit of a budding romance happens between these two women. I absolutely adored this, and that's not just because I love Jean as a person and a friend. I just really loved this magic and dragons and people getting together and being adorable. I need to read the next book when it comes out. I'm very excited. On to my 4.5-star reads, the first one being The Library of Lost Things. This one is incredibly bibliophilic, so of course it's right up my alley. It is about this girl that works in a bookstore. She spends all of her time reading. Reading is kind of the thing that keeps her going. Her home life is a little bit difficult. She has never known her father, and her mother is a hoarder, and this is a habit that she has been trying to help her mother break herself free from. However, it's not something that seems to be getting any better. The stress about this is compacted when she finds out that the building they live in has been sold to a different management company, which means there's a possibility that somebody from that management company might come into their apartment, find out her mother is a hoarder, and possibly kick them out. In addition, she's trying to make it until her 18th birthday, so Child Protective Services will no longer have the threat of maybe taking her away from her mom. On top of all of this, there's also a very cute love interest that comes into the picture, of course. I was predisposed to love this. It was bibliophilic, the love interest was great, the angst with the best friend, and the mother situation, and the father situation, and the grandmother situation, because she plays into it as well. it all very much worked for me. I also got to read an advanced copy of Ashley Herring Blake's debut adult novel, which is Delilah Green Doesn't Care. Delilah Green is a photographer in New York, and she is being paid handsomely to go back to her small hometown because her stepsister is getting married and she wants her to take the photographs. However, she doesn't really get along with her stepmother or the stepsister, and that is just a problem, and she doesn't really want to go there, but it's paying really well, so she decides she has to go. Once she gets there, she immediately goes to the bar because she figures she's going to need some liquid courage if she's going to deal with her stepfamily, and this woman starts hitting on her at the bar. Little does this woman seem to realize that she is who she is, because this woman is one of the best friends of her stepsister, and her stepsister's friends used to make fun of her a lot when she was a kid, so she kind of thinks, wouldn't it be some great revenge if I were to sleep with my stepsister's best friend? It goes from there. There's tons of wedding related shenanigans, people getting to understand each other as people. I just very much enjoyed this. I've loved everything I've read by Ashley Herring Blake, and I'm so excited that she was able to write an adult book because I've only ever seen her middle grade before, and this was just so good. On to my 5-star reads. If I ever do a reread of a 5-star read, it always goes at the beginning of my list, so something new has a chance to be my favorite thing that I read this month. So that means that Check Please Volume 1 and 2 are going to go here. I think that technically I hadn't read Volume 2 yet, but we're just going to put them together and talk about them together. These are the books that I read on the web because this is a webcomic. You can read all of it online, or you can read it in print volumes as well. This webcomic follows Eric Biddy. He used to be a figure skater and now he's a hockey player at college, and it follows all 4 years of his college career, as well as him falling in love and complications with relationships. It's just so wholesome and lovely. Everybody on the team just works together really well. I mean, there are characters that have conflicts as the time goes on. Everybody gels so well, and they're just such a big found family. And then there's a romance that comes to his life, and there's complications with that, and I just absolutely love this series. If you've never read it, please go read it now. Penultimately, we have the group read for the Queerlit Readathon, and that's Where We Go From Here by Lucas Rocha. This one takes place in Brazil, and you get the perspective of 3 different characters. 2 of them meet in an HIV clinic, one of them finding out that he's positive and one of them finding out that he's negative. The one that's negative actually was getting tested because his boyfriend told him that he was positive, and he figures that he should get these 2 people in contact so that the newly diagnosed person can learn from the person who has already apparently known that he's HIV positive for 3 years, but didn't say anything until after they had had sex. This was delightful because all of these characters were coming to learning about HIV from very different standpoints, and this book does a very good job of teaching the reader about it along the way without it being very preachy or like very obvious that that's what the book is trying to do. In addition, there's so many side characters, and they were just so absolutely lovely. There's also things that happen in this book that made me want to punch fictional characters, as well as things that happen in the book that I would love to see in like a music video, or I would love this to be turned into a movie just so I can see that scene. This is a lovely and important read, and I highly stress that everybody should read it. In fact, this is a very good one to put on your list if you're joining us for the Rent Readathon because it covers a few different prompts. My favorite book that I read this month was Firekeeper's Daughter. This one has to do with a woman who is part Indigenous and part white, which means that she belongs to these 2 very different communities in Sault Ste. Marie in the States, which just throws me off because Sault Ste. Marie is actually in Canada and in the States, and was actually one of the places that we stayed when we were on our way back from the road trip across Canada, so that kind of played with my mind a little bit. At the beginning of this book, she's going to see her grandmother to let her know that her plans for college have changed because her grandmother recently had a stroke, so she wants to stay closer to home. And we get to see how both sides of her heritage play into who she is, and also get to see both sides be kind of shitty to her for her being in both of these communities. In addition to all of this, she used to be a hockey player, her brother is still a hockey player, and she ends up having to be the ambassador to this new hockey player that's in town and show him around. She ends up taking him to an Indigenous party, and then something happens that changes the course of her life forever. I'm not going to tell you what that is. It happens about 3 hours into a 14-hour audiobook, but it's kind of the root of what happens and what makes this into a giant mystery, and I didn't know about it going in, so I'm not going to tell you. If you want to know ahead of time, you can look up a synopsis. This turned into a great mystery. There are tons of interesting side characters. There are also a lot of trigger warnings, so be sure to look those up ahead of time. I've actually linked something down below that shows up in all of my video descriptions that is actually a place to check out trigger warnings, so be sure to do that if you have have some triggers. However, this book was incredibly impactful and I highly suggest reading it. If you want to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these, please let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!